our next speaker, Henry Ward. So he's from Oro Group, lead consultant there. And he's going to talk to us about the double-edged sword of supply chain security. And he's using his customer-focused security expertise that he's built up. He's also recently developed from the ground up a third-party risk assessment process for a US-based multinational corporation, and similarly a checklist-based incident response framework with policies and standards for federal government department in Australia. So we can't wait to hear what you have to share. You've got also the ISO 27001 and CPS 234 references in there. So looking forward to your presentation, Henry.
Thank you for that glowing introduction. So supply chain risk. I'm just going to go from the slides. I've got to sort of compress this down. I've spent quite a few years doing this. I've probably assessed certainly over 2,000 suppliers at various levels of the supply chain. And the problems you come across frequently are nearly always the same. Let's just move this on a bit. So what it is, I think it's again, it's not rocket science. It's basically the people we outsource to are connected these days. We're connected in every way. And you just have to really sort of understand what they're connected to, what access they have to your stuff, and understand what their capabilities are. So that's sort of the actual risk there. You're a supplier, you've got suppliers, and so you need to know how to handle them, how to treat them, how to ensure that they are secure. And the other side of that, of course, the other side of that sword is you're a supplier. How do you ensure the security to your customers? I'm not even going to read this out to you. I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory in as much as really, essentially, this is the opening gamut, if you like, is you're exposed to everything that your supplier is exposed to. There are really only two questions that you have to ask when you're looking at your list of suppliers. Have they got access to your data? Do they have access to your systems? If they don't have access to either of those things, in cyber terms, in today's landscape, you probably don't need to worry. But as things are going, it's just a graph. It's just a hockey stick graph. Everybody's outsourcing everything. So, just think in terms of those suppliers that you know and trust. So think about Microsoft or Google or Salesforce or any of those, internet giants. They outsource everything as well. And well, Google or Microsoft might devote billions to security. Do their suppliers devote billions to their security as well? So you need to look at the bits you're using and understand how, their security or lack of it could affect your infrastructure, your business. So this is the question again, say supplier and customer. How do you interact? Historically, when I first started doing this, or supply chain first became, it's always been a thing, but when it became a big cyber thing, everybody was talking about, let's audit all our customers. And that's a horrible situation to be in. If any of you who've ever been through an audit understand that is a disruptive, invasive process. And I hope to explain to you that that's really not what supply chain security is about. If you look at the stats, 60%, okay. It's an unrealistic figure. That's most of those security scanners we've all heard of, automated security scanners like UpGuard or BitSight or Security Scorecard. And they're going to provide you with vanity graphics. They'll look at the web-facing aspect of your customers, and they'll tell you that something isn't patched or something needs updating or the hole in the software. They don't tell you that their entire patching system is broken on the inside. And so they're just trying to sell you a scanner, but it's more than that. So that's the light touch. Um, so you're sharing your stuff. I mean, I love this quote. "A change no stronger than its weakest link" by Thomas Reed. Thomas Reed said that in 1786. It's true. He was probably talking about chains, but it's the same thing with your organization. When it comes down to your suppliers, what you're looking at, what you need to look at here is what you can actually do about it. And from a purely basic standpoint, from knowing nothing about them, there is nothing you can do. I mean, essentially, anything, any risk that your supplier is subject to is entirely yours as well. And so, if you work on that premise, if you understand that at the outset, then you can kind of get an understanding of what you need to do. This is an example. A couple of years ago, Quantum were hit by a cyber attack. It was a fairly typical. It was a ransomware attack. There were only a couple of machines affected. They had a plan to a cybersecurity plan, an incident response plan. But what they hadn't taken into account was that the day that they were hit was the day that their major suppliers cut them off: Medicare, Service New South Wales, and other government organisations. So they could take as many X-rays as they wanted or scans, but they could do nothing with them. It took them 7 months to fully recover, and all the losses that went with that in that time frame. They were back up and running. They were supplying their customers within a month or two, but they had to call on a company to come in and do an audit and understand their infrastructure. They had to repair stuff. They had to fundamentally change the way they did things within what in that time was an entirely flat network. Once you got into one part, you went to all of it. And so this was fairly basic cyber stuff. They came through it and they survived, but 7 months, you'll agree, is a long time. I mean, the list, not exactly endless. I don't know if you can read any of those, but I mean, Medisecure put them out of business. We'll remember that from, I think that was the early 2010s. Who else have we got there? I can't really see from here. But the costs associated with the time to recovery, all that has to be taken into account. So you've got suppliers. What should you do? Well, there's a list. The bits you can control and the bits you can't. First of all, build a supply chain security management system within your own organization. And that involves just looking at your suppliers, understanding who they are, what they want from you, what you're providing to them. Make sure you actually know who they are. Just because they've got a good reputation or they've got a fancy website, that's not enough. Establish exactly who that organization is, who you're dealing with in terms of people, how they operate, and what their resilience is, what their ability is. All the time you're doing this, you have to remember that they want your business. And so they're not the enemy. It's all about collaboration. Don't hit them with say an audit. That's not really going to benefit you. It's certainly going to disrupt them. Just looking at the other side of that, the bits you can't really control, is that business of the padlock and the key. And that goes back to that first slide about the guy that built your software. He built the back door in there. It's the same with your suppliers. Understand the relationship, understand what they're offering you, and you can limit parts of that. The regulations that we were talking about, things like ISO 27001 or the NIST CSF, the APRA regulations here in Australia, and Essential 8 and things like that, they talk about ensuring that the contract is good, and the contract talks about cyber and places enough legal requirement on your customers to actually meet standards that you set. And that is really just a sensible level of cybersecurity. So that, will have to do with documentation, to do with making sure that they're, if they write software, that software is secure, and actually understanding how they operate. And so out of all of this, I mean, the list is a bit exhaustive. I say that's the goals. When you are talking to these people, it's about establishing, at the end of the day, what their resilience is, what their ability is to respond to and effectively contain any cyber event, incident, attack that they are subject to. If you don't know that, then the only option you have, if they are subject to a cyber attack, is to pull the plug. And that doesn't help you. It certainly doesn't help them, but it doesn't help you. I mean, there are other questions or answers in there. For instance, I mean, it's not really cyber, but a good example was Mercedes back in the 2010s used to get their color black for their cars from a factory that was in the shadow of Fukushima in Japan. And they lost that. They lost that overnight. Whereas Apple, who most of their production was done in China, had a factory that did 5% of production in North America, and they were able to switch overnight if they needed to, if they'd been in the same situation. So those are things that you should be thinking of in terms of supply chain security when you're assessing your suppliers. The other side of all of this, of course, is your supplier. Now, somebody comes to you and says, look, we're going to do an assessment of you, then all of a sudden, the heart starts racing. You start thinking, what haven't I done? What's not right? What's not good enough? And this is, if you are a supplier, which we all are, you have to start thinking about some of those basic security rules. In Australia, the Essential 8 is a good guide when it comes to being connected. It's probably a little bit detailed. I remember when it used to just be the Essential 4, and then it was Essential 8, and then they gave it to engineers, and now it's 120. But I can say that because I used to be an engineer. If you've got something, just make it more complicated for everybody. But essentially, the problem with trust is it's hard, and it's that business of information being unequal and requests create friction, which is the reason why I'm saying an audit is not the way to go. At least from the thousands that I've done over the last 10 years or so, I have found if you're in the business of connecting to and sharing data, I've found only 2 or 3 companies in all that time that weren't fit for purpose, because most people that are in this business understand this. And so asking those direct questions and ensuring that those controls are in place is not something that's going to upset them. They will voluntarily provide you with that information. So just remember, all I'm saying is that it needs to be a collaborative process for you to get anywhere, because if they're not transparent, and I think this is the thing, honesty and transparency, a great idea until you got something to hide. And that's so true. And I say, if they've got something to hide, they will hide it. And so what you're asking for when you do any kind of assessment is honesty, transparency, for the benefit of both. I don't know if I've got a slide here that says this, but basically, if you're serious about this, then invest in it and invest in your suppliers as well. I don't mean that in terms of sort of monetary investment. I'm talking more in terms of investing in their interests. So if there is a hole, give them time to fix it. If they're honest with you about the hole, that's the that gives you an opportunity to, give advice, think about it from your perspective, think about workarounds, avoiding that particular issue, but working with the client, with the supplier to ensure that your systems are secure. Now, I mean, I've got this in here because it's a theme. You have to look at what you're doing. These days, the main things that you should be doing, or the current thinking, I guess, is network segmentation. So zoning areas of information so that it's not flat, so you can't get at everything, so that you're restricting access to your most important information. Certainly if it's for public disclosure, then that's fine, it's public. But if it's anything more than that, I mean, especially with privacy law the way it is now, anything that's privacy is not, shouldn't be anybody has access. It's very much got to be controlled. It has to be looked after. Privacy gets business objectives. Tickle the regulatory boxes. Well, that's more my thing. It's probably not so much yours, but say if you're in the finance industry or in health industry, then you're going to get these people descend on you, and you have to be able to tick the boxes. It should never be just a box ticking exercise. It should be about ensuring that those controls are in place and they are effective. Getting data. Now, this is, metrics sort of arrived from a security perspective probably about 10 years ago. And so collect as much data as you can in terms of how people use, access your data, so that at least when you sort of look through that data, whatever it is at the end of the year, you can work out, what's working well, what's not working so well, where the problems are. And that gives you, at least keeps you ahead of the game when it comes to fixing things. Now, the next thing you're going to come up against, we're talking about these internet giants, is trust sites. And so how do you make yourself trustworthy? Now, Microsoft, Google, Atlassian, these big organizations, they won't interact with you and me. They simply show you the trust site, and it's up to you to go in there and find the bits of information you want about the particular systems that you're using. And that in itself is actually, it's a pretty good way of assuring that you know what the security is for the bit of that organization that you're using. You won't get them to change anything. And none of them, when you look at them, none of them are 100% secure. Doesn't matter what system you're looking at, whether it's Office 365 or Slack for Atlassian, they are 95% there. So there's always the gap. There's always that risk. You've just got to understand it, how it applies to you. I was talking to somebody earlier about one organization. I'm not sure whether it's SAP or Salesforce, but one of them, they built that system over nearly 30 years ago out of Microsoft DBase. And so it's just cards. And so their patching system for actually updating the security of their software is extended. It takes them months to apply a single patch, because they've got to disassemble everything and make sure it's not going to break when they actually apply the patches. But they understand that. They have other controls in place, but it is quite striking in this day and age that they're still having to do that. Okay, so what you can do. Again, I'm not going to read this out to you, but essentially, assess your suppliers for criticality. So who can't you do without? Who is actually integral to your business operations? Find out who those organizations are and pay attention to them first. There'll be others that are kind of lesser importance, in as much as they're nice to have things work better when they're involved, but and there might be some disruption, but you can still keep moving. And then there'll be sort of the rest that are just part of a pool that you could get from anywhere, maybe not as a moment's notice, but at least they wouldn't disrupt your business. So you've got to work out who's most important. You've got to work out who you're going to look at. So those critical suppliers that have access to your systems and your data, and they actually connect to your systems rather than you supplying them with data, you have to decide what your risk appetite is, how much freedom you're going to allow them. Are you going? You would always assess everybody who's high risk, and that might be the type of data they're handling or the way they process that data. But medium risk and low risk suppliers, I'm not going to say, I mean, medium risk, they actually usually where your largest risk lies, actually, funnily enough, over time, over an extended period of time. Low risk, you're probably not going to have to do an assessment on them. They probably don't have access to your systems, and the data that you provide them with is sent by you to them, and it's not identifiable. But at the same time, they might be an important supplier, and so it may be in your interest to actually do an assessment of them. But that's a discussion that you have internally. How do you do it easily? I guess as you look at each supplier, you triage them in terms of you work out exactly what access they have, where they connect, how they connect, what sort of data they have access to. Do they have access to all the data, or is it just a bit of data? And so by working that out, it makes it a lot easier to actually assess those risks and the risks that they bring to your organization. The assessment, at the end of the day, it's a questionnaire. There are various frameworks out there. Generally speaking, they all consist of about 120 different control points, security control points. A questionnaire doesn't need to address every single one of those. It shouldn't be leading questions. Don't say, what do you do for this? It's very much, how do you handle a certain situation? And so keep those questions non-leading. There are many questionnaires out there. You can pick them. It's pretty much a Google search if you're looking for a security questionnaire. But back it up with evidence. And so collect the data. Look at their security policy. If they're developing software or they have web-facing login portals, then there are various scanners you can use to actually check the validity of those or the security of those portals. But also, you should look for independent penetration test reports and have a look at those and see if they've identified any weaknesses. Things like an ISO 27001 certification is pretty much a marketing tool. That says that you tick all the boxes and you are secure. It's kind of point in time. I guess the crown jewels, if you like, or the golden ticket is a SOC 2 Type 2 report, which is an assessment over time, which is done as an audit of a particular supplier, and that normally tells you what's working and what's not. Usually, it again covers about 120 different control points, and it'll tell you how it performed over a period of 6 months or a year. Then you've got to do the analysis. You've got to make sure that the questions that they answered and the evidence you collected matches up. And so it's comparative analysis. It's not, did they lie? It's, this doesn't match, and ask the question, why didn't it match? And quite often there's a good reason for that. They say, oh, well, we don't actually do that particular control, but we have lots of others surrounding it which make up for that. A good example of that is I was working with a medical company back during the pandemic, and they had records from clinical trials that go back 30 years. And so they didn't encrypt anything. And that is a huge red flag. If you're looking at security, no encryption. And so you sort of ask them, you know, what's it, you know, why don't you encrypt stuff? And they said, look, this is 30 years of medical data. We can't afford a single thing to move in here. If there's any corruption, that can be 30 years of work down the drain. And so they had a whole bunch of other security controls around their systems, which made up for that. But if you don't ask the question, you'll never know. I mean, the solution is plan ahead. Do the assessments, do the checks before you sign the contract. It'll save you a lot of heartache down the track. Implement those controls. If you like, writing security policy, security policy says this is what you must do. You have to ensure that they've got standard operating procedures that say this is how we do it. Then once you're confident the documentation is written, controls are implemented, then I say that's when you start thinking about getting those certifications. Now, that's all I got to say. But you got a couple of minutes for questions, if there are any. Straightforward, dead easy. It's not rocket science. Okay. Thanks very much.